The Vintage Vibe. Where today we're going to take a look at Sansui's SR-2050C Turntable.
If you're a fan of Sansui, chances are you've had one, maybe two, well, in my case, 10, 20, I don't know, I've lost track. Amplifiers, receivers. Diehard, you've had a pair, well, or two of their speakers. But the big question is whether or not they make a good turntable, whether or not you should consider one to match your favorite integrated amplifier, or if you're lucky, maybe you got one of the fabled AU111 tube amplifiers. The big question, is it worth going to the dark side? Did they make a good table? Does it sound any good? How much is one going to cost you? And does it deserve a place in your vintage audio collection?
Now this is an interesting turntable because it's a manual with auto type functions. That's an auto up at the end of the record as well as an auto stop. Simplicity at its best, weighing in, well, a pretty massive 26 pounds, using a 4-pole synchronous motor as well as the same tone arm as the TA-2050. This is quite a turntable. It's well engineered and it's certainly from the golden days of Sansui's hi-fi. Sansui marketed this as a mid-range turntable, and it has some neat features, including a double rim platter that was about 1.3 kilograms. That tone arm had a lateral weight, and it could also track a cartridge up to about 2 grams. All in all, it was a tremendously built turntable for the dollar.
So let's talk a little bit about the Sansui SR-2050C. It is, in my opinion, a strikingly handsome turntable, if that's what we call turntables. It really does have good looks. It's well built. Everything's got a really nice fit and finish to it. And quite frankly, for a Sansui, which I don't really associate with high-end turntables, they did do a fantastic job, I think, when they came out with this turntable, likely in the late 60s or early 1970s.
Let's take a peek at some of the features, including the auto stop, auto lift, as well as the cueing mechanisms.
So this little guy here is really just a cleaning mechanism. It was common in a lot of turntables from the 60s and 70s, kind of a little add-on. They will create a little bit of drag on the turntable, and they could slow down the table a little bit. I like to just use a proper brush, clean the disc off, clean the needle off, and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. This kind of works nice. This is Zero Dust is what it's called, and it's almost like a little gel from a company called Onzao, I think is how you pronounce it. Hard to kind of focus in on it, but that works quite well to clean the needle off. This particular needle is a Stanton. It probably tracks at about 1.2, 1.5 grams, and I think this table is kind of set up to go as high as about 2 would have been typically, the needle that would have been provided with it. Now to get the platter moving on this table, basically we just go here and we switch it to the on position, and there you can see it starts to spin. The little LED kind of lights up over here, and just like any other turntable, manually move over the arm, and then move from the on position to the play position, and that will lower down or cue our arm. And as you'd guess, if you want to return it, back up to the on position again, off. You can see there's not a heck of a lot of free spin there on the platter. Now I did disconnect the belt from the spindle to kind of freely spin it without the motor attached, and it does spin. There's not a bearing issue, and there typically is not bearing issues with these as long as they haven't been abused and they've been oiled occasionally. The motor may be providing or causing a little bit of friction for whatever reason, but it seems to be running fine, seems to be pretty quiet, and again, holding speed fairly decent, maybe just a hair below kind of the ideal speed. But, it's a nice functioning turntable. And again, the auto lift mechanism, I'll show you how that works in 1 second here. So on the auto lift mechanism, we would just kind of set here to the record that we have. Let's say we've got it down at 25, so it's a 24. And we're going to lower down the arm. And as this arm kind of tracks to the end, which it's almost there right now, it will just kind of pop itself right back up. It is a little loud, a little kind of jarring at first, and it's a mechanical mechanism that pops it back up. But again, it does the job. And sometimes with some of these tables, you know, the duals and whatnot, there's so many mechanisms underneath of them. That's usually what fails first. So the more simple the mechanism is, in my opinion, the better. So we're kind of coming to the end of the track here. We should see the auto lift mechanism. Simple as that. The whoa and flutter on this turntable is said to be about 0.07, which is, you know, probably not bad, you know, for the time period. By design, there is a motor that is attached underneath to this platter. So it is going to be a little more susceptible to vibrations. And I think there's actually kind of little rubber isolators almost that the motor sits in on there. That can be an area for tweaking one of these turntables. Or perhaps, you know, the motor can be separately mounted, perhaps down somewhere in the base, and you can decouple it from the platter, which would be nice because those vibrations can find their way to the arm and might be something that's noticeable kind of in between tracks. Particularly with, I've heard this table doesn't seem to have that problem, but almost a hum that could be picked up through the arm as a result of that motor. It also has kind of a shift on the fly, let's call it, between 33 and 45 for speed. You do have to engage that when the platter is actually spinning for it to work. And on this side here, kind of a ingenious Sansui's way of actually lowering the top. It really is just a kind of a metal peg that will kind of find itself into a groove here on the side of the turntable and be able to hold it in kind of various positions. So simple, yet effective. The platter is about a 1.2 kilogram die-cast aluminum platter, so it's got a decent weight to it. The arm itself, again, looks to be a well-engineered arm. It actually has a lateral kind of balance or control for lateral balance over here on the backside, which you don't see typically in turntables very often. So we got a little Frank Sinatra here. So we're just going to lower down the top. And again, there is kind of how she looks with the lid on. I've seen worse with the lid. It does look quite nice with the lid off, but you know, it kind of reminds me of a Dual or even an Empire from that time period. Very easy to lift up, kind of with this molded handle here. And as you can see, that little pole kind of drags along the side and nicely kind of finds a groove. There's two positions, one kind of here in the middle, right about there, and then there's another one a little further back, right about there. And if you do need to kind of service things, you know, the hinges will allow the lid to kind of even go further back. And in this case, I could kind of lean it, you know, right on the wall there in order to kind of get right in there and adjust things or whatnot.
So, how much will one of these Sansuis cost you? I've seen them at the low end for about $150 unserviced. On the other hand, for a nice example that's been looked after, it would not be unreasonable to pay upwards of $400 Canadian in 2020.
So are there any things to look out for when shopping for an old Sansui table like this? Well, I think like any table, it's important to know a little bit about, you know, its history. Has the table been serviced, you know, at all? Things like oiling the motor and oiling the bearing. Those are all important things. In addition, what's the condition of the actual cartridge and the needle? Now, this might sound just kind of like obvious, But these sorts of things, when you do have to service them or replace a needle or a cartridge, all start to add up and add to the cost, the investment, that you're putting into, quite frankly, a vintage or an aged turntable that likely will need additional repairs as it ages. For example, this table here having a suspension platter, it would not be unreasonable to think that in a number of years, I mean, now it's pushing about 40 years old, you might have to reduce some of the rubber bushings, whether it be on the platter or whether it be on the mortar. Those are just things that you'll have to possibly consider, or replacing a capacitor inside there, or an auto lift mechanism. These are all things that should and can be expected with a vintage type table. Other than that, though, when it comes to vintage belt drive tables, this is a fairly simplistic one, and that's a big plus.
So, how does it sound? Well, I mean, it's not the utmost in definition, but I think you kind of expected that. But it has that good old vinyl feel and vinyl sound to it. Obviously, the better the cartridge, the better the table. But all in all, it does a good job with recreating, well, the vinyl experience. I mean, what better to play some Frank Sinatra on than a Sansui SR-2050C? Thanks for joining us on the Vintage Vibe, and don't forget to like and subscribe.